Weary modern souls, Dr. Romantic, the quirky genius doctor of Puldam Hospital, prescribes heartwarming tales of humanity. A couple together for 7 years sees their rose-tinted glasses shatter. Can they keep their relationship alive? Discover the raw stories of youth, work, and love. Beyond what social media can show, experience the vibrant Korea through its hidden gems. Mama, the ultimate K-pop festival for global fans. Find your star in a feast of trendy music and electrifying performances. Now, the whole world enjoys it together.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong, in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
Hello and welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News on this June 3rd, Election Day. I'm Peunji. As the 9th nationwide local elections continue across the country today, voters are heading to polling stations to cast their ballots. Voting began at 6 a.m. and will continue until 6 p.m. today. We have our correspondent Jung Il-im at a polling station in Seoul. So Il-im, what's the atmosphere like there at this hour?
Good afternoon, Inji. I'm standing outside Sangdo Sadong Community Center in the Dongjaku district in Seoul. It's just afternoon, so we can see the polling station is crowded with lunchtime voters. I got to speak with some voters today.
We wanted our vote to help make the country a better place and think voting is something everyone should do. We are expecting a child, and that's expensive. So we paid close attention to policies related to childcare support and family welfare.
Now that we're expecting a child and both working, issues like maternal leave are especially important to us. We hope there will be greater efforts to improve and better promote these benefits for working families.
What's most important is electing a capable mayor for Seoul. I believe voting is one of the most important responsibilities. I'm over 70 years old now, and I've never missed an election.
Right, so Il-im, there's about 6 hours left before voting closes. For those who haven't had the chance to vote yet, are there any tips to keep in mind?
Yes, Inji. So in order to vote, the most important thing is identification. Voters must bring a government-issued valid ID card or mobile ID app. Unlike early voting, where voters could visit any station, today they can vote only at their designated station, which is based on their residency address. Your station can be checked on the National Election Commission website or in the notice that was mailed to your home. For foreigners, you can vote if you have permanent residency here in Korea, but you have to have lived in the country for at least 3 years. Lastly, voters are not allowed to take photos of their ballots inside polling stations. Marking more than one candidate will also invalidate your ballot. That's all I have at Sangdo-dong. Back to you, Inji.
All right, that was our correspondent Jung Il-im reporting from a polling station in Seoul. And for more on how this year's election is playing out, let's turn again to our Park Gun-woo at Arirang's extended reality studio. So Gun-woo, tell us more.
Welcome back to Arirang's extended reality XR studio to take a closer look at voter turnout. So, starting with voter participation, according to data from the National Election Commission as of 11 a.m., voter turnout stood at 15%. That's 3 percentage points higher than the previous election. Out of the 44,649,908 eligible voters, that is those born on or before June 4th, 2008, and also excluding early voters, over 6.7 million people cast their ballots as of 11 a.m. today. And now it's just past 12, even more voters will have cast their ballots across the country. The National Election Commission will announce the final voter turnout after voting ends at 6 p.m. today, with the potential turnout rate to be released at around 8 p.m. Now moving on to the hourly breakdown of voter participation. Polling stations opened at 6 a.m. today, and the first official turnout figure released at 7 a.m. stood at 2%. That's 3 percentage points higher than 4 years ago. Now, the rate had climbed to 4.5% at 8 a.m., also climbing to 7.4% by 9, and rising for at least more than nearly 4 percentage points, so 11% at 10 a.m., and actually rising 4 percentage points at 11 a.m. by 15%. We can see that the number of ballots cast has been increasing with each passing hour. And adding to that momentum is this year's record high early voting turnout of 23.51%. And that figure will be reflected in the overall turnout from 1 p.m. Now we turn to the voter turnout by region. Of the country's 16 cities and provinces, Daegu City showed the highest by nearly 19%, exactly 18.9%. And Daegu typically sees high voter turnout on election days, while turnout during early voting is comparatively low. We also have Gangwon-do province in the upper region at 17.7%. And we also have Gyeongsang-buk-do province, 17.6%, the next highest after Daegu City. At the other end of the spectrum, we see that Jeonnam Gwangju United Special City at 11.4%. We also have Jeollabuk-do province, 11.9%, while Sejong City in the middle is 12.9%. Regions in the Jeollado provinces and Gwangju City see comparatively low participation on election day as more people vote early. If we take a closer look at some of the key battleground areas, including 5 regions that both the ruling Democratic Party and People Power Party have chosen as crucial to the race, starting with Seoul, voter turnout we see that 14.3% has voted in their area. Also in Gyeonggi-do province, one of the most populous areas in the country, 14.5%. And if we come down a little bit, we have Gyeongsangnam-do province standing at 17% right now. Also in Busan City, the second largest city in Korea, 15.5%. Ulsan City, 16%, and Daegu also at 18.9%. And finally, let's take a look at voter turnout in previous local elections. In each of the past 5 elections, voter turnout has exceeded the 50% mark. The highest turnout over the past 2 decades was recorded in 2018 during the 7th local elections, which is 60.2%. That means more than 60% of eligible voters cast their ballots during that time. The most recent election saw the lowest turnout finishing just above 50%. However, with this year's early voter turnout running nearly 3 percentage points higher than in the previous election, attention is now on whether overall voter turnout will also surpass the previous figure. And we'll get a clear picture after 1 p.m., and that's when early voting ballots are incorporated into the official turnout tally. And we'll be back at 4 p.m. Korea time with more updates. Back to you, Inji.
With closely contested races unfolding across major cities, provinces, and key parliamentary districts, our Lee Soo-jin takes a closer look at the key battleground races and what's at stake.
It's election day with several key races still neck and neck. Here's a look at the candidates and why these contests are garnering attention nationally. We begin with the local elections, which will shape regional leadership for the next 4 years. The spotlight is on this Seoul mayor race in the capital city, a closely watched contest between Oh Se-hoon of the People Power Party and Chung Won-ho of the Democratic Party. To describe this whole mayoral race in one sentence, a showdown between a four-term conservative incumbent with 10 years of experience and a progressive local administration expert who served 12 years as a three-term district head. The focus is also on the governor race in Gyeonggi-do, the nation's most populous province, where Choo Mi-ae of the Democratic Party, a six-term lawmaker and former justice minister, is facing off against Yang Hang-ja of the People Power Party, the first female executive at Samsung Electronics' semiconductor division. As for this race, it's garnering attention as it is guaranteed to produce South Korea's first ever female provincial governor. And as for the mayoral race in Busan, the nation's second largest city and a traditionally conservative stronghold, Jeon Jae-soo of the Democratic Party, a three-term lawmaker who resigned from his parliamentary seat to run for mayor, is facing off against Park Hyun-jun of the People Power Party, the incumbent mayor. The Busan mayoral race marks a high-stakes battle as a popular progressive candidate seeks to break into a long-standing conservative stronghold. The final local election we want to highlight is the governor contest in Gangwon-do, a traditionally conservative province where Woo Sang-woo of the Democratic Party, a veteran politician and former four-term lawmaker, is taking on incumbent Governor Kim Jin-tae of the People Power Party. The key significance here is that it has become a closely watched battle as a high-profile progressive figure seeks to make inroads into a traditionally conservative border province. Alongside the local elections, by-elections for 14 National Assembly seats are also underway. A closely watched by-election is the one taking place in Busan's Busan-puk A district after three-term DP lawmaker Jeon Jae-soo stepped down to run for mayor of Busan. The race in the key swing district features Ha Jung-woo of the Democratic Party, a former presidential secretary on AI, against former minister Bang Min-sik of the People Power Party, and high-profile independent candidate Han Dong-hoon, a former PPP floor leader. To describe the significance of this race in one sentence, a closely watched battle because it has transformed into a high-stakes three-way battlefield with a split conservative vote. The National Assembly by-election in Gyeonggi-do, Pyeongtaek-B, home to the massive Samsung Electronics Pyeongtaek Semiconductor campus, pits former prosecutor Kim Yong-nam of the Democratic Party against former lawmaker Yoo Wi-dong of the People Power Party and former Justice Minister Cho Guk of the Cho-guk Innovation Party. This race has emerged as a closely watched three-way contest in one of the nation's key industrial hubs, with attention focused on the split progressive vote between the ruling party candidate and the high-profile third-party leader. Amid heightened political tensions and tight races across key battlegrounds, the stakes remain high in both the local elections and parliamentary by-elections. But by the end of tonight, we'll finally see the clear map of South Korea's new political landscape.
And this year's election is considered one of the country's most complex ones due to the number of local leaders chosen at once. Our Park Juna reports on the detailed voting process.
Coming exactly 1 year after the 2025 presidential election, voters in Korea are heading to the polls for the 9th nationwide local elections. In most parts of the country, eligible voters aged 18 or older will be handed a total of 7 different colored ballots to elect positions, ranging from provincial governors to local council members. Voters in Sejong City and on Jeju Island, which operate under special administrative systems, will receive just 4 ballots. Some 150,000 foreign residents can vote. To qualify, foreign nationals must have held permanent residency for at least 3 years and be on their local foreigner registry. While early voting was available at any polling station nationwide, voting on election day works a bit differently. Voters must bring a valid ID card or mobile identification app and vote only at their designated polling station based on their resident registration address as of May 12th. Polling stations across the country will be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. To keep things organized, the voting process is split into 2 rounds. In the first round, voters receive 3 ballots, a white-colored ballot for metropolitan mayor or provincial governor. The light green ballot is to choose the superintendent of education, and the axial ballot is to elect the head of the local district, city, or county. In the second round, voters receive the remaining 4 ballots to select local council members. The light pink and sky gray ballots are used to elect local constituency council members at both the broader provincial and tighter district levels. Lastly, the sky blue and cream ballots are for proportional representation representatives. When voting, you must choose only one candidate or party per ballot. Marking two or more names or parties will instantly invalidate your vote.
Votes will be counted immediately once the polls close on June 3rd, ushering in a new 4-year term for local leaders, including the next mayor of Seoul. 박준환, Arirang News.
So voters across Korea are heading to the polls today for the country's 9th nationwide local elections. But why do local elections matter? Our Kim Jun-ho explains more.
On June 3rd, Korea holds its nationwide local elections where voters choose the leaders of their communities. While some decisions are made on a national level, everyday issues like transportation, education, and housing are often handled locally. Let's take the capital, Seoul, as an example. Whoever wins the race for mayor will help shape the daily lives and livelihoods of more than 9 million Seoul residents. Backed by a budget of around $33 billion this year, the mayor determines the direction of the city's policies and spending priorities. It's not just mayors who are elected. At the local level are heads of smaller districts, cities, and counties who handle services closer to daily life. Council members are also elected at both the metropolitan and local levels to oversee government affairs. Some ballots are cast for political parties rather than individual candidates, with proportional seats allocated in both metropolitan and local councils based on each party's share of the vote. The final ballot goes to a superintendent of education who oversees local education policy. Local elections are often seen as a barometer of public sentiment toward the sitting government. They can also serve as a stepping stone for future political leaders, with the number of national figures having built their political careers in local office. Given their close link to community issues, some foreign residents are also eligible to vote, unlike presidential or parliamentary elections. Above all, local elections carry deeper meaning as a foundation of democracy, offering residents a direct voice in local issues. While national politics often dominates the headlines, local governments and councils can have a real impact on the day-to-day lives of local residents. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
집값도 사실 수도권 가격이 너무 높은 편이고 주거도 대부분 수도권에 포진되어 있는 편인데 이걸 조금 가격을 조정을 하고 지방에도 살 수 있도록 인프라를 구축해 주는 게 맞지 않나라는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
일단 일자리를 늘리는 게 중요하다고 생각해서 그 지역 내에 있는 고용을 창출하냐 못하냐 좀 그런 것들을 중점으로 보고 있습니다.
일단 지금 금전적인 거는 많이 해주시는데 일단 돌봄이나 이제 아기 같으면 교육이나 이런 게 일단 서울이나 대구는 좀 너무 많이 차이 나서 조금 뭐 평준화 시켰으면은 좋을 것 같아요.
그리고 우리 종합병원이 하나 있었으면 좋겠어요. 부여는. 예, 저 대전까지 나가야 되고 그리고 이런 사람 다리 이렇게 불편한 사람은 누가 실어다지 하고 모든 게 불편한 거 많아요.
인기 있는 정책 말고 좀 더 길게 보고 혹시나 이번에 당선되신 분 그 다음에 어떤 분이 오더라도 조금 더 연속성 있는 정책이었으면 좋겠습니다.
And now for more on the broader political implications of this year's election, we're joined today by John Delury, visiting research fellow at Ewha Women's University and senior fellow at the Asia Society. Dr. Delury, thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, pleasure.
So for the sake of our viewers overseas, could you just briefly tell us a bit about Korea's current local elections and why they matter?
Yeah, well, your correspondents have been explaining very well a lot of what is at stake. Of course, as a local election, it's not going to have quite the same international impact as a presidential election or parliamentary election, but it is an indicator of where the country is heading. It's also a chance to test the strength of the democratic system itself, you know, and we'll be talking, I'm sure, about voter turnout. That's one of the most important indicators, even before we know the results. So it's a chance to take a look, I would say, at the health of the democracy, and then also get some indicators going forward in terms of party politics and maybe some personalities who could be emerging from this election who will be important down the road.
Right, so Korea saw a record voter turnout during the 2 days of early voting last week. So both parties are interpreting the high turnout very differently. How could the strong early voting turnout affect the outcome of the election? And could it lead to a high voter turnout on the election day today?
It was hard to, do the analytics and extrapolate from early voter turnout to say who's going to win this election or that election. And I think there is increasing evidence, maybe in Korea and more broadly, that it's not the best indicator of a winner. Although, as you say, probably each party is going to, see the result that they hope in the statistics. I think at this point what we can say is it is very encouraging to see the high percentage of early voter turnout, and also so far in your reporting that today is going well, and maybe the election overall will exceed previous years. I think that's really the key number, is when you look at the composite turnout rate. There are all kinds of reasons that people might vote early, practical reasons that don't have anything to do with party politics or issues, and those trends can really shift every 4 years. And so I think we should be hesitant about extrapolating from those percentages. Again, the important thing, I think the broader significance, is that the turnout rate looks high. And what that tells us is that South Korean citizens do have faith in their democratic system. They may be happy with things and want to keep incumbents in charge, happy with things and want to get rid of incumbents and send a positive message about the presidential administration, the ruling party. They may be unhappy with things, but even if they're unhappy, they are going to vote to register their frustration or disappointment. So that is a very good indicator that wherever you're falling on the political spectrum and wherever you're feeling about how things are going in terms of the direction of the country, people are voting. People think it's meaningful to vote.
Right, absolutely. And what's also important is that this is the first national election under President Lee Jae-myung, right? And so could the results be interpreted abroad as a barometer of public support for the administration's policies?
I think inevitably, in terms of international coverage and outside, governments, non-Koreans looking at this election, inevitably, whether it's true or not, there's going to be an inference that this is a kind of referendum on President Lee Jae-myung. That's what's going to happen, because when you try to get from local issues to, okay, what's the national and international significance, the first thing that people are going to look at is, did the Democratic Party, did the president's party do well, do really well in these elections? And if so, that's going to be seen as a referendum. Of course, what we're seeing in terms of international coverage is that his polling numbers are very high. And so he's widely perceived as a strong president. And so this election will be another test. On the flip side, if the Democratic Party does not do well, then that is going to lead to international perception of something's off, something's wrong, maybe he's weaker than was thought. So, yeah, I think at the international perspective, it's inevitably perceived as some kind of referendum on the president.
Right. And beyond deciding local leadership, what broader political implications could the results have on the ruling and opposition parties at the National Assembly?
Well, there's a lot of complicated dynamics happening on both the conservative and liberal side. I would say it seems, especially as a foreigner trying to follow these things, I think for foreign audiences, it's especially complex understanding what is happening with the conservative opposition party, just because obviously last year they really imploded with the impeachment of a president who had shocked the country and frankly shocked the world by declaring martial law. So there's still, I think, a lot of questions about what's the future of the conservative, movement and the main conservative party, the PPP. So I think there will be a lot of attention, including by foreign observers, to try to read this election to see what is the fate of Korean conservatism. So I think there'll be a lot of scrutiny to some of the elections that you've been talking about as indicators of where that's heading. And of course, with the election here in Seoul of the mayor, which is a nationally prominent and even internationally prominent position. Seoul is one of the world's first cities, and the mayor of Seoul does have a certain international platform. Whichever party that figure is from will also be something that, again, at a global level, will get some attention. I think it's a little more orderly on the liberal end because you do have a popular president, for the Democratic Party in Lee Jae-myung, who looks to have, consolidated his strength fairly well. But again, we'll have to see the results of these elections and if there's new questions that emerge in terms of the future of the Democratic Party. But I do think there's a lot more attention about the conservative side of the ledger.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And more on that, to what extent will foreign governments and international audiences be watching these election results, and what conclusions might they draw from these results?
Well, I think we have to be realistic here. In terms of foreign governments, of course, they'll be monitoring this election, but in the hierarchy of Korean elections, you have the presidential election, you have the National Assembly, parliamentary elections, and you have the local elections. So I've seen international coverage. The New York Times, for example, wrote up something, a preliminary report, and there will be more at that level in terms of paying attention to it. But still, I think foreign governments fully understand that this is not a national election, and so they're not going to overdraw their conclusions about what it means. I think another international audience that's interesting to consider is not so much about governments, but about citizens globally. We are living in a moment of history where there are serious doubts about the future of democracy itself. And if you do, look at some of the research by political scientists, by civic organizations, again, globally, there's real serious indicators about backsliding, democratic backsliding, loss of confidence that liberal democracies have in their own systems. And so in that sense, I think this election and Korea in general is very important. Korea has a lot of soft power, as we all know. And it's not just limited to music and TV and film. It's also about the political system. And so showing the health, the vitality, the integrity, for all its flaws, like every democracy, of the system, I think that's an important global significance of today. I think there are civic groups who monitor democracy are going to be paying attention to this election.
Right. So do these election results have any implications for Seoul's approach toward North Korea, perhaps, or other foreign policy challenges, especially if they are viewed as a referendum on the administration's broader policy direction?
Yeah, I think, in terms specifically of the North Korea challenge, that's a huge challenge. That is a national challenge, and that's not something that locally elected officials have too much room to move on. If things were to improve in the inter-Korean space, you could see, and we've seen in the past, we saw in 2018, for example, when the relationship was better between the two Koreas, you can start to see provincial and a mayoral level engagement, between the two Koreas. So that's one space to watch. I wouldn't say that's going to happen anytime soon, but down the road, if things changed at the high political level, you could see local involvement, local governments getting involved in that way. Otherwise, I think, again, to a point we've been talking about, the overall strength of President Lee Jae-myung, if his party does well today, that's going to strengthen his hand in international negotiations, in navigating what is obviously very difficult circumstances for South Korea, dealing with the alliance with the United States, dealing with the economic pressure coming from the Trump administration, tariffs and trade war, dealing with China, with this big, powerful neighbor who Korea has a strong economic relationship, but a complicated overall strategic relationship with. So anything that strengthens the hand of the president will make it a little bit easier for the administration to navigate some of those challenges.
Right, absolutely. All right, we'll have to see how that goes. Dr. Dillery, thank you so much for coming in today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
On May 10th, 1948, we stood in lines with no end in sight, holding an unfamiliar piece of paper in our hands. It was Korea's first election, held under the watch of the United Nations. A nation's longing for democracy filled the ballot boxes, driving voter turnout to a remarkable 95.5%. Since then, countless elections have come and gone. Through moments of hardship and change, one thing never wavered: our passion for democracy. And we kept asking ourselves, how can more people take part more easily? One answer was early voting. Today, all you need is your ID. On the way to work, at the airport before a trip, anywhere in the country, your vote can reach the ballot box wherever you are. Technology changed the process too. Long nights of ballot counting gave way to faster, more accurate automated systems, making elections more transparent and trustworthy. What once felt like a long and distant road in 1948 has become one of the closest rights we hold today. The process may be simpler now, but the weight of the vote has never changed. This June 3rd, we carry the torch of Korea's democracy to the ballot box, protecting the freedom generations fought to build.
Meanwhile, over in the United States, the Trump administration says any sanctions relief for Iran will depend on Tehran giving up its nuclear program, rejecting reports that Washington offered concessions tied to the Strait of Hormuz. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Tuesday that the Trump administration has not offered Iran sanctions relief in exchange for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, stressing that any easing of sanctions would be tied solely to Tehran abandoning its nuclear program and complying with any future agreement.
Iran is being sanctioned because they've highly enriched uranium. Iran is being sanctioned because of their nuclear activities. If they agree to give up those things, there will be sanctions relief associated with their commitment and compliance with those agreements.
Rubio was testifying before Congress for the first time since the Iran conflict began, as Washington continues efforts to negotiate a broader settlement aimed at reducing tensions in the region. He also addressed questions about Iran's leadership, saying Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who was reportedly wounded during U.S.-Israeli strikes and has not appeared publicly since taking office, is alive and becoming more engaged in state affairs. Rubio told lawmakers there are signs Khamenei is increasingly active behind the scenes. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts are continuing on another front. According to reports, Israel and Lebanon resumed direct talks in Washington on Tuesday, with discussions scheduled to continue over 2 days at the U.S. State Department. The renewed dialogue comes as fighting between Israel and Hezbollah remains a complicating factor in broader U.S.-Iran negotiations. Although Israel and Lebanon reached a U.S.-brokered ceasefire in April, sporadic clashes have continued, raising concerns that renewed violence could undermine efforts to stabilize the region and advance negotiations between Washington and Tehran. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims to have struck the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, using a barrage of missiles and drones. According to Reuters on Wednesday, Tehran launched the offensive as a direct retaliation for a U.S. strike on an Iranian tanker near the Strait of Hormuz and a military communications tower on Qasem Island. U.S. Central Command, however, firmly rejects these assertions. In a public statement, CENTCOM said that all recent Iranian attacks directed at American forces have failed, and that incoming projectiles were either intercepted or fell short of their targets. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has pointed to South Korea's steel industry as an example of what it calls government-driven economic intervention, as the Trump administration continues to push for a new global trade framework. In an article published in the latest issue of the IMF's Finance and Development magazine, Greer questioned how South Korea, despite lacking major natural resources such as coal and iron ore, became a global steel-making powerhouse. Greer argued that government interventions have distorted global trade, creating persistent trade imbalances between nations. His remarks come as the USTR investigates South Korea, China, Japan, and other trading partners over alleged unfair trade practices, a move that could pave the way for additional tariffs. And now that's all we have for this noon edition of Arirang News. We'll be back at 4 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.